Hello, and thank you for tuning in to the Saturation Sound Podcast. I'm your host, Zach, and I'll be interviewing various musicians, producers, and persons of other vocations associated with bringing you the music you love. My main focus is on sharing wisdom that is particularly suited to helping music makers on the indie, underground, and DIY level build their craft as they try to make their way in the world of music. If you enjoy this podcast, please follow Saturation Sound on Facebook and on Instagram at saturation.sound. If you really enjoy this project and want to support me and keep tabs on my music, production work, and potentially submit questions for future episodes beyond the pilot of this podcast, I've set up a Patreon page at patreon.com/saturationsark. That's saturation, Z-A-R-K-E, all one word. You will also be able to find links and social media handles for any local bands, artists, or hustles we name drop in the show notes or description, depending on where you're listening. Today's guest is Derek Clayton, an instructor at Recording Arts Canada, as well as audio engineer, photographer, and musician. In this episode, we go over his path to employment with Recording Arts Canada, the value of resilience in pursuing your dreams, and huge dose of insight about self-improvement, career development, and professional mindfulness. Derek can be found on Instagram at derek.makes.music and is in the process of rebuilding his website at derekclayton.ca, all one word. I hope you enjoyed the episode.
Yeah, I've been meaning to getting some gear for. I bought an Arts.
The VLA?
Just on a whim. Yeah, I think it was one of those. I don't remember the exact model. It was the whole vocal channel thing for $400.
Oh, yeah.
The thing was phenomenal. I ended up returning it just because at the time I didn't have the money to justify keeping it around, but
yeah,
love to pick another one of those up.
Yeah, I've my studio's been doing a bit of a glow up over the past pandemic season. I just finished filling up my 500 series lunchbox.
Ooh, nice.
I got some DIY kits over the past week-ish and just finished assembling those the other day and swapping some goodies around. Are you familiar with the DIY recording equipment?
Yeah, I'm familiar with some of it. I haven't ever really bought any of it myself, but I've looked into it.
Yeah. So that's what I got all of their kits from. That stupid video that I sent with the 2 reverb pedals, that was using a second one of their reamp boxes, and I got a second one of their CP5 mic pre's, a set of the DOA colors, just all sorts of geeky stuff.
Nice. Yeah, I've been meaning to do a bit of upgrading around here. I've been running the same rig since I think mid 2019.
Yeah.
Pretty much the only big bump I got was I've got a new 4K 43-inch screen in front of me.
Oh, nice. Yeah, I'm still in the 1080p era. I feel like a dinosaur there.
Yeah, my partner and I picked one up when we were moving in together.
Yeah.
And then we left it at my old place for a couple months, and I said, "Oh, this is sitting here. I may as well hook it up. You start using it as a screen," and I could not look back. So we ended up just getting another TV for the living room, and I just kept this as a second monitor.
Yeah.
It's great with everything except ProTools, pretty much. ProTools, for some reason, still doesn't support past 1080p on Windows.
Which is strange because you'd think that that's the post-production DAW, right? So they'd be, going at the big video production resolutions, which I think is now, 8K?
Pretty much. Well, it supports 4K video in the DAW, but the actual interface doesn't play well with it.
Like the buttons and icons and stuff don't scale up.
No, not nicely.
Man, that is distressing.
Yeah, and it's only on Windows. Mac uses high resolutions, and it's fine there, which I guess makes sense. All those big post houses, they're going to be running Macs anyways.
I guess, but that's let people use the tools they want to use, right? Just support all your customers. But anyways,
it's Avid for you.
That's my pro-consumer side coming out.
Yeah, that's pretty fair.
All right. So getting into the meter there, why don't you introduce yourself after all this preamble, which is probably going to get cut down in the edit. Who are you? What do you do?
All right. So my name is Derek Clayton. I am an audio engineer, photographer, teacher. I've been in the Toronto audio industry for 3 or 4 years. Before that, I was doing some online stuff from the middle of nowhere in Manitoba.
Yeah.
My main gig right now is I'm an instructor at a private career college called Recording Arts Canada, where I teach live sound and entertainment as a full course, and then do teaching, occasional lessons for other parts of the curriculum in addition to a bunch of other student assistant stuff.
Excellent. So you mentioned the starting off in Manitoba. So why did you come to Toronto? What was the process like? Was it to pursue education, or was it just to get into a more bumpin' scene?
The reason why I came to Toronto was mainly because it was it's a bigger city with a much bigger scene. Like, that was part of it. It was kind of not a planned thing. I originally came here just to visit a friend who'd been living here because he was working in the film industry back in 2016. And it was just sort of, I was working doing supervisor and back-end maintenance and computer stuff for a grocery store, and I was burned out, and I'm like, I need a vacation. And I had some medical stuff I had to take care of as well that didn't line up right. Plus, I checked, and there was a bunch of concerts going on in Toronto, so I said, you know what, I'm going to go take a month, and I'm just going to go check the city out.
Just for the sake of a shout out, what were some of those concerts?
Believe the two big ones that I went to were Coheed and Cambria and Protest the Hero.
Oh, nice.
Playing at Rebel, and then the other one was Gojira with Tesseract opening up for them.
Okay. Yeah. Heavy hitters.
Oh, yeah. Those were the planned ones, at least. I went to a bunch of other amazing, like, smaller ones that I just found. Like, I would just start looking on Facebook, and they'd be like, hey, this show's going on at this small venue. And I mean, I got to see Symphony X at one place. I found out about Leprous through this.
Oh, okay. I just haven't dug into Leprous yet.
Oh, they're so good.
Yeah.
Just these really nice, like, just very dark, moody, atmospheric prog stuff. But yeah, I just saw this band called Leprous. I actually didn't look them up. I was expecting them to be like more of an old school death metal band with a name like that.
Yeah.
But then I saw them, and I saw Earthside opening for them, which is another, based out of the US. They're sort of a prog rock, prog metal band. The interesting thing they did with their show was that their album was half instrumental and then half all guest vocalists. So they had like the vocalist for Seven Dust in there. They actually had Daniel Tompkins from Tesseract do a track.
Okay.
The cool thing they did is they essentially toured around with a bunch of large like TVs and would just play video of the vocalist for that track performing with the backing tracks. So you still got the vocal performance.
Okay. Yeah.
And it worked out.
So it's kind of like a more Stone Age version of those hologram shows.
Kind of, yeah. It was a very lower budget one, but it worked out phenomenally.
Yeah. Were they like old CRT TVs?
No, they were.
Oh, that would have been so aesthetic.
That would have been that. Aesthetic wise, that would have been cool.
But logistically,
logistically, because they had like 3 or 4 screens hooked up, and the thought of some roadie or the band having to haul 3 or 4, 45, 50-inch CRTs. I mean, I know I had a friend whose parents decided to buy one of those back when like big screen TVs were starting to become the thing, before flat screen was even, it was just in its infancy, and they bought it and didn't think of the logistics, and it took, I think, 5 people to get it into their basement.
Crazy.
Because the thing was a couple £100.
Yeah, getting back to it. So you were coming to Toronto to see a friend, wanted to see a bunch of shows, ended up seeing some cool ones. What else?
Well, the other thing was I found out about the college.
Okay.
We were hanging out. He had a day off work. I didn't have anything planned for the day, and we were just looking around. He's like, hey, this place is doing an open house. It's got a really nice recording studio. You want to go check it out? And I said, yeah, sure. I wasn't thinking about the education thing at the time. In fact, I was a little bit, when it came to audio, I was a little bit like
anti-education.
Well, not anti-education. That sounds a little worse, but like structured traditional education for that.
Anti-establishment.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and that's actually a bit of an interesting theme that's kind of come up in these first few pilot episodes. Is we've had one guy who hasn't been through much of the traditional education, one guy who's in it, one guy who's been through it, and now you're one guy who has been through it and is now teaching it, but came from a place of being anti-establishment.
Yeah. So the big thing was talking to the director of the college. Essentially, after the open house, he had a chat and just talked to him, and he, in the course of an hour of conversation, just completely flipped my mindset on it once he started explaining the point of it, the purpose of it, and the understanding of the idea that you don't know what you don't know. And that's the big thing that people who I find shy away from this stuff and say, well, I can just learn whatever I want on YouTube.
Yeah, that was a point that I brought up from the last podcast with a guy named Alex Purcell. Is one of the main benefits of actually some of this, post-secondary education for music is the curriculum itself, because they actually have an idea of some of the skills that you might not know that you need to know. It's directed learning, but keep going.
Yeah, exactly. And it pushes you into, especially for a program like ours where, there's a set curriculum. You don't have classes you can choose to take, classes you have to take. There's 12 courses. Everyone through the program takes those 12 courses, and make sure that people take the ones that aren't the sexiest classes, but are the most important. Like basic things like how a room works in terms of physical acoustics and how you calculate, reverb time in a room, how you understand what a standing wave is and how to deal with it. All that kind of stuff is stuff where if you're just wanting to learn stuff on YouTube, you're not going to look into that stuff. You're going to be looking up cool side chaining tricks for getting your bass to stick out, or some sort of weird mid-side encoder decoder that allows you to make your EQ sound just a little bit nicer. And that stuff's all important, but all of that's not valuable if you're doing all of this in a poorly treated room.
Exactly.
With your monitors not placed properly, and understanding that is important.
I might be knowingly guilty of this.
I mean, if you don't have that, like, I don't want to tell anyone you can't do audio if that's not the case.
Yeah.
A pair of headphones will get you a long way if you're in that kind of situation.
Oh yeah, very, very far, because it's, with a little bit of referencing and a little bit of knowing the weaknesses of your system, you can make do with surprisingly bad stuff.
Yeah. But just being pushed to understand that, and even knowing what to look into, like, that's the biggest thing, is that if you don't know that something is a thing, you don't know to look for it.
Exactly.
And then you're just going to stay ignorant on that. But so going back to that, I talked to this guy and he kind of convinced me. I still took a little while. Like, I came out in 2016. I didn't end up actually going to the college until like a year later, because I took a year of like personal self-study to make sure I was ready to go. I had, I was going to hit the ground running, and just to make sure, this is really what I wanted to pursue. Because up until that point, I had been doing audio work, and I was doing it as like a side thing and having some fun with it, but I wasn't sure if it was a career to jump into at the time. And so once I sat down and thought about it, and I looked at, the education part was a big part. The networking in the college was just as important as the curriculum for me.
Yes.
And that was a big part of coming to Toronto. Was I was coming from a town of 1,200 people in the middle of nowhere. The next city is,
Oh man, that's small, huh?
Yeah, next city is like a 3-hour drive away on a terrible road. So good luck taking any gear with you there. So getting to go to a place where, you can run into tons of people. Like, I remember just realizing I'd walk down, it was Queen Street or something, or King Street in downtown Toronto for a few blocks, and I'd kind of like just mentally reference stuff in my head and be like, I think I just walked by more people in this 15-minute span than I would see in a month in my hometown. Like, that kind of stark difference.
So quick little aside that I gotta ask, so you like a lot of extreme and heavy music. How do you get into that in such a small town? Like, how do you get exposed to that?
Honestly, big thing for me was the internet.
Yes.
I don't know if I would have been as into it if the internet didn't exist compared to it now. Like, it did start for me, like pretty much everyone does with a lot of extreme music, is your friend or your friend's older brother who's into this stuff shows you a song and it just clicks.
Yeah.
And like, I distinctly remember being like 11 or 12 years old, and one of my friends like showing me Ride the Lightning by Metallica. And that was the starting point. And I'm like, okay, I can vibe with this. Like, this is something,
But it still took having that person in such a tiny, isolated, insulated town to give you that first hit.
Exactly, yeah. So it really is still a word of mouth thing. And then from there, the internet was a big thing of exploring and trying to learn how to get used to it. And just finding those bands. Like, I find with a lot of extreme music, especially people making the transition to listening to music with harsh vocals.
Oh yeah.
People always say I can't really get into it, and I always tell them, like, you just gotta find that band that makes it click. You gotta understand it. Like, for me it was Children of Bodom. It actually came to my mind when we heard about the passing of Alexi there earlier on in the month. Just remembering hearing Are You Dead Yet, hearing Follow the Reaper, and just being like, okay, like, this starts to make sense. There's a lot of melodic musicality in this music, and the harsh vocals are more of a texture over it. It's not the melodic content. The guitar playing, the synth playing, that's the melodic content. This is a texture element. This is more of just creating a mood, not creating a melody. And that was the band that made it click. And once you understand that, your brain starts to rewire itself to understand it from that way, because it is very different from how we typically hear music.
Oh, very much, very much.
Like most styles of contemporary music, the vocal carries the main melody and the instruments are a texture under it. And this kind of flips it on its head.
And also, a fun little note is it might also be a matter of perspective, because some people, when I ask them about this, they're saying, oh, it feels like they're screaming at me. Whereas, you know, some people who are a little more attuned to it, it's just like, yeah, no, it feels like they're screaming with me. Like the people who are into it just kind of put themselves more in the singer's place.
Yeah, that's a really great way of putting it, actually. I've never considered it that way, but that really does make sense.
Yeah. It's kind of like, as opposed to receiving aggression, it's like you're projecting power.
Exactly.
Because it is a very powerful expression. Like, if you practice harsh vocals of your own, it's something else, because it's like a full body resonance they have to get into.
Yeah, and it's almost cathartic. Like, just being able to project that anger out of you is such a nice, relaxing element.
And also, do remember that a lot of these vocal techniques are using like vestigial vocal flaps from back when we were, you know, other sorts of primates. So you're tapping into something that's like primal and animalistic.
Yeah, absolutely. But you know, I had that friend showing me that stuff, but then, you know, the internet really was a big part of exploring the more extreme thing. And I remember, I look back at it now and it's hard, but remember going to websites like Metal Archives and spending time on the forums there and getting suggestions on music, and that kind of got me into the metal community. You know, looking back, I kind of realized how closed-minded a lot of those places are. There's always sort of been, I always found like on Metal Archives there was sort of a elitism, and it's sort of like a race to see who could enjoy the most obscure stuff and who could sort of hold the most esoteric takes. Like, I remember specifically the post where I looked at it and I said, I need to stop reading this website. Because there was this continual sort of groupthink of, you know, how early on did Metallica sell out? And people, you know, everyone would always say the Black Album. That would be the obvious one. And then people were like, oh, no.
My hot take is it's immediately after Cliff's death.
Yeah, that's what some people said. You know, it was, once Cliff was gone, it wasn't the same. People were like, well, you know, Master of Puppets is pretty poppy. And it was Ride the Lightning was their last good album. And I distinctly remember someone saying, you know, Metallica sold out when Kill 'Em All came out. Like, the No Life Till Leather and Hit the Light demos, that was really the only good Metallica stuff. Once Kill 'Em All came out, they all went downhill. That was just pop there. And I saw them like, what the f- am I spending my time on?
Yeah, that's one of those things it's a double-edged sword, right? Because these online communities will introduce you to, you know, things that could really shape your life and your personality and your tastes. But it's kind of the nature of the internet, even before, you know, social media became so algorithmic, where like-minded people will naturally find like-minded people, and then you will just get this echo chamber circle jerk sort of thing going on.
Yeah. At the same time, though, I find the way social media is set up now, where there's these hub sites and there's small communities within the hub site, but they're all in the same area, does actually lead to a more open-minded understanding of things compared to how it used to be. Because it used to be, you know, you'd have websites like Metal Archives, you'd have separate websites, so there'd be no chance of cross-contamination. Like, you can't accidentally stumble onto a hip-hop community from a metal website. Like, it's really hard to do that. Whereas nowadays, on Facebook, Instagram, Reddit, all these other communities, there's a lot more crosstalk, there's cross-pollination. And I find a lot of these newer communities are much more open to different styles of music, different, you know, ideas there. At least in music. I mean, obviously, when it comes to politics and other topics, you could argue it is a lot more closed-minded and insular, but at least in the music side, it was so closed-minded and insular in the past that I guess it had nowhere to go but to open up. But that's the big issue with those small communities is, you know, I spent a lot of years, because of what I read on these communities and what I was told in these communities, you know, ignoring music that I would have loved strictly because it was not true cult metal. It was not the real stuff.
Yeah, I remember some friends who were on these sites way back when, and they were telling me about people. Actually, no. Was this stuff that I was. Anyways, it was information that I received either firsthand or secondhand from people on these sites talking about how things were disqualified from being on the site because it was like contaminated with the core influence.
Yeah, that was the thing, is there were moderators on that were very much like metalcore is not metal. Therefore, if a band even sounds slightly metalcore, it doesn't even get listed. Like, I think Between the Buried and Me was not even allowed on Metal Archives for a while. It's such a clearly metal band, but because they came from that hardcore scene, had some of that influence, and they're like, nope, not going on.
Yeah, crazy.
Yeah.
So that was a huge aside, which I love. But let's get back to, okay, you were coming to Toronto, you would see more people like in one day than you would, or more people in 15 minutes than you'd see like in your entire town.
Yeah.
Keep going.
Yeah, and that was a big part for me, was having that community around. Also, honestly, for me, it was just a change of pace. I mean, I'd been in that town for 16 years at that point, and you kind of just know everything that goes on there. You've got the grocery store you go to, you got the bar you go to with your friends on the weekend. It's the same repetitive thing. So finding some sort of change was important for me. Just to force myself to adapt and to sort of learn new skill sets and meet new people and just change the sort of insular way of thinking I was kind of stuck in. And all that planning led to me saying, well, yeah, I'm going to pursue this as an education and go from there. And so, I remember I was so ignorant to just the basics of how a city worked, and same thing with my family. I remember getting laughed at by landlords because I was, trying to find a place to live, and I just call them up and be like, oh yeah, you can just email me a lease. I'll sign it and send it over. I'm like, no, you got to come here in person and we got to talk about this. And so at that point I just said, well, guess I'm hopping on a plane. I booked an Airbnb for a month, and there I was.
And you made it work.
Made it work. If you want to make something work, 95% of the time you're going to do it. Like there are times where there are outside factors that can get in the way, but
I mean, we're living in a big one of those right now.
Oh yeah, but usually you can get around it.
Exactly. Kind of taking it to recording school, right? So you mentioned, you took your year of self-study to make sure that you're going into it prepared, and when my band did that little recording session in there as, what was that, like a finals project, or?
It led to our final project.
Yeah. Because, when we were seeing that, you were definitely leading the room in terms of the students there. So what was the experience kind of transitioning from studying to eventual employment with the school?
Well, for me, it was a fairly gradual one, because I was there just as a student, and then the college has an internship program where they bring you on to sort of assist with classes. So you're going to be there, you're going to be assisting with classes, you're going to assist with studio maintenance, which is a big thing. Just getting to see, what goes into keeping a top-end recording studio up and running. And
with that old Neve desk with all the channels that didn't work.
Oh yeah, that's a little bit more work, unfortunately, because those are relics. Like that Neve is from 73, 74. So
yeah. It's a venerable machine, but venerable machines take a certain level of TLC.
Yeah. I mean, the hardest part for getting something fixed like that is you got to find someone who, A, is qualified to run repairs on it, and B, is willing to run repairs on it, knowing that if something gets screwed up, that's gone. Like I had people ask, well, why don't you take a look at it or try and fix it? I'm like, I probably could fix some stuff, but I wouldn't do it unless I had like a plane ticket to South America or something, because I'm going to flee if I damage that thing.
Yeah. That thing is a little older than my bass amp. I got a first generation V4, so that's probably early to mid 70s.
It's older than most of the students that we have come through there.
Yeah. Which is awesome.
Yeah. Oh, it is cool. It's amazing being able to...
That machine has seen lifetimes.
I mean, we're fortunate enough to be, I think, the only college in Canada that has something like that. Like there's a couple others that might have like an SSL mixing console or something, but no one that has like an original Rupert Neve console like that.
Yeah.
But sort of going in from being a student and even trying to take on some leadership roles like that there, that sometimes just came out of necessity. It's an unfortunate thing of, you get too many cooks in the kitchen, and no one's actually getting anything done because they all kind of feel like someone else is going to be getting something done. And at least for that session, for me, I felt obliged to take a leadership role because I was the one who booked you guys and brought you guys in. So I'm like, I'm going to do everything that I can and probably overwork myself to make sure this works out. In fact, I don't know if I've ever told you this, but like a week or two before that session, I ended up in the hospital with a kidney stone.
Oh.
And I distinctly remember like sitting in a chair with a morphine drip in my arm while they were figuring out what it was, texting people trying to get patch lists and everything to get documents organized. I kind of thought about it after.
I would like to see those texts. I'm sure they looked amusing.
Oh, there's one I have where I messaged one of my instructors who was also the person, he sort of did a lot of the administrative work there, asking for like some documentation on the console. It was on a weekend, and I'm like, I'm probably not going to get this. And he got back to me in like 15 minutes. I'm like, I messaged him, I was like, thank you so much. I'm going to name my first child after you. And he's confused. And I looked at it after. I went and talked to him like the next day we were in class. I'm like, hey, so I'm sorry about that weird text. And he's like, yeah, I thought that was a little weird. It's like, well, for context, I was in the hospital on morphine when I sent that. So he was a bit more understanding once he got the context.
Yeah.
But, taking a leadership role there, and then the internship opportunity came up, and I was a candidate there just due to, how well I did in the program, and I went through it, and, the employment part came mostly as a right place, right time kind of thing. Guy who was doing my job was stepping down. He wanted to focus just strictly on teaching, and he didn't want to worry about any of the day-to-day stuff, and they needed someone, and I was there, and, it really is how it was a microcosm of how the whole industry is. I was just in the right place at the right time, and I knew the right people.
Yeah, and you were also, toughing it out at the time, because while you were in that internship position, you were also, working, what was it, full-time, part-time in retail to make ends meet?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. That last semester, it was into that last semester of college, there was a point where I was working full-time in retail and at a store that was an hour away from the college, and then also going there. So I would get on a bus at 8 a.m., go to the college. I had my classes from 9 a.m. to 1 p.m., Monday to Friday. And then I would immediately leave class, hop on another bus to get to my job. I would work there until midnight, and then get back on another one, get home around 1 if I'm lucky. If TTC was slow or I missed a bus, which happens sometimes, then 1:30. Crawl into bed and wake up to do the same thing the next day.
Yeah.
And just hope I have enough food cooked and have enough laundry done to make it through to the weekend.
Mm-hmm.
But you do what you got to do.
Yeah. And you were able to, put in that time, put in that grind to tough it out, and eventually, because you were, in the right place and you were able to survive for the right amount of time, or survive long enough for the right time to come by. And you were, I'm going to assume you were one of the more promising candidates. You managed to make luck happen.
Yeah. I mean, when you look at it outside, it's actually a little tougher than it is in that kind of situation, because when you look at it outside, you're like, well, why didn't you quit? Why didn't you do this? Why didn't you say, screw this, I'm just going to do this? When you're in that kind of situation where you're just, trying to keep your head above water and doing that, you're not thinking about that. Like, you don't have the energy, you don't have the time, you don't have the mental focus to concern yourself with how situation you might be in, because you're busy dealing with the situation.
Yeah.
And that can suck if it becomes a perpetual one. But situationally, it's also a very good thing for helping you push through and achieve something that you didn't think you could. Yeah, just by virtue of, turning off that negative part of your brain, because you don't have your body doesn't have the fuel to power that. So you just got to keep going, slogging through it.
Exactly.
Not to say I would go and tell everyone, okay, well, go get enough jobs that you're working 16 to 18 hours a day, 7 days a week. Like, don't do that to yourself. Like, there's a reason I ended up in the hospital. Was partially due to that, but it helps out. And so, yeah, when I was in the internship, I had thankfully reduced my hours a bit at work because I had moved to a much cheaper place. At the time I was living there, the time when I was in college, I would burn through my savings, and I was living in like a 1-bedroom apartment, which in Toronto was expensive. I managed to get a cheaper place, but I was still, I was doing that internship. I was working there at evenings, and then doing freelance stuff and just trying to get, some mixing gigs, some editing gigs, whatever I could do to keep pushing myself forward and keep feeling like I'm making progress.
Yeah, doing the thing.
Exactly. Because to an extent, if I'm spending all my time working to be in a city where I'm supposed to be working on music, like I'm not working on music, then you've kind of lost the point of the whole transition there. And that happens sometimes. There were a couple times where I was like a month or two, I'm like, I haven't done anything creative in this city that I came to be creative because I'm so busy trying to stay in this city. Like, what am I doing?
So, you transitioned from the internship to an actual job. How long did you get to enjoy that before, the world soft ended?
Well, I was lucky enough that I got to do that for about a year and a touch in the more traditional sense.
So when, the pandemic kicked off and the lockdown happened, what changes did you guys have to make to the curriculum and how you execute classes? Because I think we talked about this briefly, how you were looking for ways to keep people more focused and engaged in online classes. What were some of the steps that you had to take?
Well, there was a lot that we did, and it wasn't just me. The way our college is set up, and that's a very centralized system where there's a developed curriculum and that. So, it was an all hands on deck type situation. Like there was an entire revamp of our program from the ground up. We did as much research as we could into different online tools and to making sure that people could do work from home, to try and get as much hands-on work within there as possible. And it was as basic things as putting in, like prompts every 5 minutes or so just to wake people up. Like not quite as blunt as just like clapping in front of the mic and making sure everyone's awake, but asking people questions, running polls, things like that. And then there was sort of the development of making sure that there was always something hands-on for people to do in every single lesson, or as many times as we could, like try and have as many lessons as possible where students at some point have to open up a ProTools session or have to open up Reason or whatever software we're using for that lesson and actually do something.
And that actually kind of suddenly makes me consider one of the criticisms that I do hear about a lot of recording schools is that they are focused on very old school mentality sorts of things. Could this be spun as an opportunity to modernize the curriculums in a way to focus on things that many audio students will eventually end up doing in today's music industry?
Oh, absolutely. That was one of our big goals, and that's something that we've always kind of strived to do pre-COVID even. We would have students come through and say, well, my plan is to graduate here and I'm going to start handing out resumes to different studios and just try and get an engineering gig. And kind of have to sit them down and smack them up the side of the head and like, you're considering an industry that no longer exists. Yeah. Like there's maybe 5 or 6 big recording studios in Toronto pre-COVID. I don't even know how many there are now, maybe 3 or 4. Now, do you really think you're going to be the one person to get an engineering gig at these studios that are already, struggling to make ends meet?
Yeah.
So no, you need to think about other opportunities. You need to think that you're not going to have just one gig that's going to pay your bills. I think it was actually, oddly enough, as much as people give him shit for valid or invalid reasons, I think it was Ty Lopez that really talked about not putting all your eggs in one basket and diversifying your income and making sure that you don't just have one gig paying for everything. Because if you got, your one job that pays all your bills and that dries up, you got nothing to work with now.
Yeah.
Whereas if you're, doing some work at a studio, but you also do your own freelance stuff and you've got, a website where you sell samples that you've recorded, you've now got different streams of income that make you a lot more financially secure.
Yeah.
Because if any of those one drop off, it's not 100%, it's like 30% gone.
Exactly. Hey, why do you think I'm running this podcast? I'm trying to set up a digital content creation system to allow for some of that passive stuff while I'm also trying to hustle some audio work, some band work. It's one of the big things that we want to push here on this podcast is a diversification of skills, which I think pivots nicely into you've worn multiple hats over the time that I've met you. Mm-hmm. What are some of the hustles you've gone through? Just list them out.
Yeah, well, the first one is obviously, doing recordings for bands and doing a lot of post-mixing stuff. either just taking on editing work for different projects if someone doesn't have time, or speaking to bands myself. But some of the other things I've done are, live sound work and event management. I've done quite a few of these sort of, I call them like guerrilla style concerts, where you're not going to just a venue that's got things set up, or even a place that's meant to do for music. Like, you're going to like an art hall or something, and making something work from there from the ground up.
So when you're doing that, are you helping them coordinate sound system rentals as well?
Pretty much, yeah. If not, just renting the stuff myself.
Yeah.
There was one gig that we had to deal with where I essentially went and rented the equipment myself, brought it over with the team that we had, with the express knowledge that we could at least leave it there to take it back the next day. And then, like, show ends 1 a.m. The owner of the place rolls out, sees the gear there, takes one look at it, and says, "Yeah, you're not leaving that here. I got stuff to do in the morning." And so we hauled it back to my apartment and stored it there. So, it was a 17-hour day, and at the end of it, we're loading subwoofers and lights into as many Uber XLs as we can afford, and hauling it up 2 flights of stairs to store it in my living room.
Oh, man. Nasty.
Yeah, but it's that kind of stuff. And it's, organizing events and making sure everything's clear there. And then not just doing sound for live shows, but I've done photography, videography, like any sort of...
You've done that for a couple of my projects I've seen.
Just sort of anything I can do. Like, for me, it's not always been just audio work. I just want to be involved in music. And if that means I'm at a show taking photos of bands, why not?
Quick question. You've shown me some of the stuff that you've worked with before. Have you actually been paid to play on a record at all?
I believe I have on a few. I'm trying to think of an example, because there's been session work that I've done. Sometimes it's just a quick aside for a friend. Sometimes it was going to be an aside. I mean, there's times where I've ended up being a session musician for something I was just mixing just because a part was needed. But yeah, I mean, it's whatever shows up. Like, my philosophy is always, if you come up to me with a problem, I'm going to do my best to do it and resolve it for you. And if I can't, I'm going to make note of that, so that way I can learn that skill set so I can resolve it.
So photography, videography. So quick question on that is, how did you cultivate these skills? Did you just, get yourself a camera and jump into it? What goes into, putting on this hat?
Well, the photography one came through the college, actually. We started up a bit more of a marketing department there, and they were looking for a lot more content capture, and they had teams at our other campus located in Montreal, but we didn't really have that team in Toronto. So the marketing head was just like, "Hey, there's this camera in the closet. Do you want to just go and grab some photos?" And I just said, "Sure." And I took some, and they were crap. I didn't know what I was doing. I had not touched a camera that wasn't part of a cell phone at that point.
Yeah.
And so we sat down and just like, okay, well, they were, the person was grateful enough to be like, "Okay, well, this is the problem. This is the problem. This is how this works. Here's the manual for the camera." And from there, I just kept practicing and getting better. And it started as that part of the gig. And then I eventually said, well, you know what? I'm going to try and pick up some cheap equipment and get myself started. And I think I didn't invest a ton of money into it. That's the nice thing about how a lot of these industries work these days, is you can get started for very cheap.
Yeah. Just to ballpark for somebody who, might seem a little daunted by the idea of going out and getting a camera, how much did you invest into starting photography?
I think I've spent maybe less than $1,000 in total on photography equipment.
And what all would that include? So a camera, obviously, but did you get lights? What else?
So I've bought a camera, storage, flash items, other tools like, carrying equipment's a very important thing that people don't budget for. And things like backdrops. But a lot of that stuff can be found for cheap. Like the camera itself, it's not anything special. It's a Sony Alpha 6000. Solid camera. It's about 7-8 years old at this point. But you can find those used. I got mine for $400 from someone who just wasn't using it. And then from there, it's just a lot of the equipment, there's different price levels. And you can go and spend, a couple $1,000s just on a camera flash alone. And that flash will probably be phenomenal. It's going to have tons of features. It's going to have a lot of control. It's going to be consistent. It's going to be great. But if you're starting out, you probably don't know what 90% of those features do. And you probably don't need it, because your flash at that point is not going to be deciding how good your photos are. It's going to be your skill set.
Exactly.
And it's important to learn it. So I found like a $50 Niwar flash on Amazon. And I'm just like, this will work.
Yeah.
Bought it, tried it out. It eats through batteries sometimes and can be a little clunky, but it got the job done.
Exactly.
And that's just what I did, is I just looked, what's a cheap alternative that I can use, and then I'll upgrade later on. I mean, cameras are a lot like audio in that once you start looking into all the little cute things you can get to make things nicer, you know, the list of costs goes way up, and you're looking at lenses that cost $3,000. It's like, it's the same thing as like people talking about like, you know, oh, I'm going to start recording. Like, should I buy this $1,200 preamp or this $1,500 preamp? And you kind of got to remind them. It's like, well, dude, like, you're just getting into it. You don't know what you want. You don't know what you need. You don't know if you're going to keep doing this in 6 months.
Exactly. And what some of these people don't know is that some of the differences in these, you know, $1,200 versus $1,500 preamps is only going to really show themselves when you're running them at a level beyond the clipping point of their ADC. So it wouldn't even matter for them anyways, because they don't even know what back end they need to support that thing.
Exactly. And I mean, the biggest thing I find is that money could go towards you
educating yourself,
or even just having time. Like, time is a huge essence thing. And I would talk to students when I was a student. I would talk to my classmates who would be talking about like these $80,000 vintage opto compressors and say, oh man, when I've got this, you know, massive studio, or I'm really getting things going, like, I'm going to invest some money in that. And all I do when I look at that compressor is like, I could hire a studio assistant for 2 years for the cost of that, at least. And what's going to help me with my business more?
Yeah.
This compressor that's going to sound slightly nicer and look pretty cool, and I can brag to my buddies about it, or this entire other person that's going to give me a new perspective, it's going to be able to help do work, and it's going to help me expand my business.
Or hold on, let's even break it down to one of those much smaller scale. Not even talking 2 years of an assistant. Let's talk, you know, $1,500 mic preamp. Let's say you're working like an okay labor-ish job, and your daily takeaway is probably going to be about, like, if you're doing okay, about $150. So that is a 2-week vacation you could justify for the cost of that mic pre.
Exactly.
Right. And in that 2 weeks, you can record somebody's EP and, you know, make yourself, like, you know, probably half the cost of that mic pre.
Absolutely.
You know?
I mean,
and then you would have, you know, the clout of having done that EP, the networking opportunities that comes from it. Or you can take that $1,500 and buy a channel on your input system.
Yeah, and you can have it sitting there looking pretty and collecting dust because you're too busy working to actually record anything. Yeah. So, you know, it's the same thing. It's with anything. Like, start cheap, scale up from there. You know, it's start, like, if you want to start doing audio stuff, like, go get a Scarlett 2i4, a couple $100, plug that into your computer, go get, you know, a mic kit from somewhere, get like an SM57, or if you're really on a budget, go get like those Chinese pile knockoff ones. They're like $12 on Amazon, and use those. They're going to get you far enough. Like, your inexperience with it is going to show more than the mic itself.
Or you get yourself a decent DI box in a 58.
Yeah, that's always an option too.
Or you just do away with the DI box and just get the 58.
Yeah, pretty much.
You know, get yourself the vocal mic. Although a 57 is a pretty suitable vocal mic if you don't want like that aggressive rock.
Yeah.
Like, it's a super subtle difference as opposed to the 58, but
I mean, like, the point is, get something cheap and get started from there, and don't worry about the fancy things like preamps. Like, if you're looking at, you know, a $1,500 mic preamp, first and foremost, you should have an acoustically treated room before you touch that, because that preamp is going to do nothing if there's all of this slap echo coming from your room and the whole EQ curve of it is wonky.
Although, a quick little hack is you can get a surprising amount of mileage out of 2 to 4 freestanding gobos.
Oh, absolutely.
If you're talking like a vocalist.
Yeah, and that's true for the recording part of things. But the thing you got to remember with a treated room is it's not just it affects the whole end of your production. Like, it affects how you hear the stuff in the songwriting stage, when you're recording, mixing, mastering, everything there. So that preamp is going to help you when you're recording the vocal. But if you can't hear it well enough to mix it properly, then all of that's gone to waste. So there's always these more important things. And that, you know, kind of goes back to the college, because, you know, if you just learned online and you just kind of looked at whatever you wanted, you'd probably wander into gear or something, and you'd hear people talking about these expensive preamps, and you would understand that that's what you need. You know, it's not that I need this,
because that's what everyone's hyping.
Yeah, everyone's hyping, so that must be the important thing, without realizing that either these people are A, just as misguided, or B, they're working under the assumption that you have that already. So why would we talk about it?
Operating at a level so far beyond what you don't even know you don't know. They've forgotten more than you've ever learned.
Exactly. And so a sort of more structured education, you do at least get the push to understand, oh, hey, I actually do need I do need this ahead of time. I need to prioritize this. I mean, I had a conversation with a student just before the end of last year. He was graduating. He's starting to build a recording studio, and he's going through his budget, and he's asking me for tips on gear. And I started going through and helping him with that. And then it kind of clicked with me. I'm like, so what are you recording all of this on? And he's like, oh, I got my MacBook. I'm like, okay, what kind of MacBook is it? He's like, oh, it's a MacBook Air from 2016. And that was kind of the thing of like, okay, well, don't worry about buying these preamps or anything. Go get a new computer first and foremost, because that's going to be your chokehold. Like, a lot of studio gear comes down to finding your weakest link and upgrading it. If you can go and buy all this nice mixing gear and all these plugins, but if your computer is going to struggle when you have more than 8 tracks in a session, it's all moot.
And that is a thing where I am always shocked at like how lightweight raw audio is, but a lot of the tools that we use to process audio these days are pretty heavy. So unless you develop a workflow where you're constantly freezing and rendering, which is inherently going to slow you down.
Yeah. And then it comes back to, time being, a financial tool, and time being a resource. You can go through by freezing, but if you're going to spend...
Yeah, if somebody's speccing out like a high dollar studio like that, then it makes sense to have a bigger computer. But it's one of those things where your old/weak computer shouldn't stop you from getting into audio. But if you're going to be investing so much money, you got to set your priorities straight.
Yeah, I should clarify, like, this isn't saying, again, like, you need a $3,000 MacBook Pro that's maxed out in order to do this. Like, if you've got, an HP laptop that was $300 from 5 years ago, give it a shot. But when you're looking to improve your studio, when you're looking to spend money, again, don't put all your eggs in one basket. Don't shove everything into a bunch of nice vocal preamps unless you know for a fact that all you're going to do is vocals. Because especially if you're starting out, you might invest everything in there and then realize that you really love editing for post-production for film, which is something you never considered, but you got a gig with it, you like it, you ended up being good at it.
But it brings your computer to its knees.
Yeah. That gear is now not doing anything for you in that spot. So having something where you've invested, in a decent monitoring setup, some room treatment, and a decent interface, and a decent computer, and getting your baseline good to go, and then tacking things on top will lead to a much more consistent setup and a much easier time. And even considering things that you don't think of a lot of time. Things like, getting a nice computer chair. I mean, I remember Brian Hood from Six Figure Home Studio podcast, not to plug another podcast on your podcast here.
No, you can do that. Hey, that is a valuable educational tool.
Yeah.
Diversify your educational consumption.
Absolutely. They were the Six Figure Home Studio podcast. I think they're rebranding as the Six Figure Creative because they're trying to move. Again, they're trying to move past audio and move into other industries at the same time.
Increase their scalability.
Exactly, and diversify what your options are. He sort of mentioned that he had all this nice studio stuff, and then he kind of looked down one day and he realized that he had been using the same $50 office chair that he bought from Walmart 10 years ago, where all the leather was starting to peel off and everything.
Guilty.
And his back would be, tightened up by the time he's done with the session. And he's like, well, no, I should buy something nicer here. Like, understanding all of that, spending money on your education, spending money on your health. A lot of people want to put in 17 or 18 hours a day on audio, but you're not going to be productive if you're sleep deprived and you're unhealthy.
Yeah.
That's one thing I have to remind myself, because that's the mindset I grew up in. That's the mindset I learned early on was, well, just don't sleep, just keep going. And I kind of had to shift it to remember, like, okay, if I'm going to work for 18 hours today and I only get 6 hours of sleep, I'm going to be exhausted. If I take one of those hours of work and move it back into the sleep category, I've now got 7 hours of sleep, which is a pretty substantial improvement there. I'm losing 1 hour of work, but realistically, I'm losing about 6% of the time I had for working.
And then gaining 16% in your sleep.
Exactly. And not only that, but if that bit of sleep makes me more than 6% more productive in my work, then I'm actually going to get more done with less time.
I will say probably one of the worst periods for me overall in terms of, quality of life, ability to focus, and productiveness was when I was working to burn off my student debt, I was doing construction full time, and I was getting probably about 5 hours of sleep a night for the better part of a year, and I was a miserable, unfunctional human being.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
I was not working anywhere near as effectively as I would have, had I had an extra hour or two to live
Yeah,
with.
it's sleep quality too. I actually just dealt with that in the last year, where I ended up between COVID, between work, between some other stuff that was shifting around in my life. I was just feeling exhausted constantly. And just trying to, I took sort of a tech mindset of troubleshooting it, of like, okay, well, let me remove this one aspect. Let me change this one aspect and see what happens. So like I changed some medication. So I switched back on the medication. Didn't fix it. I quit drinking coffee at that one point to see if that would help with some other stuff. Went back to drinking coffee. Still didn't fix it. I took a couple weeks of less work because I had been working a ton. I had been helping, my partner move apartments a couple times because she was kind of shuffling around between places. That didn't help. And what it ended up being was a health issue. It ended up being a severe like vitamin D deficiency.
Yeah, you mentioned that.
And that didn't click with me because like I was getting 6-7 hours of sleep a night, but I wasn't getting quality sleep. So my body was essentially just laying there, not resting. It would be like if you laid in bed with your eyes wide open, staring at the ceiling for 7 hours a night. Like, you're not going to feel rested. And, going to see a doctor, getting a checkup, and catching that issue fixed it. So kind of paying attention to your health there and making sure things like that don't happen. Because they'll creep up on you. I didn't notice it because I was just gradually feeling more and more tired.
It was the boiling a frog thing.
Pretty much, yeah. Until the point where I kind of felt like, I felt like perpetually like I've been awake for 3 days straight. And again, like, I could say, oh, whatever, I'm just going to power through this, but I'm not going to be productive. It will impact it did impact my productivity, impacted my ability to do my job productively.
Yeah, because if you're tired, like, your ability to focus is going to be shot, and your attention to detail is going to be shot. And if you're doing anything artistic, like, attention to detail is crucial.
Absolutely. Even, basic management stuff, like just being able to make sure that you've paid your bills on time, making sure that everything is concretely set up so that you're not doing something dumb, making sure you don't, get killed on the road because you're not paying attention. You take a wrong turn somewhere and get T-boned by a semi. Like, this stuff is really important, not just in your work, but in having a, productive life. And when it comes down to it, like, as much as I love music, if I'm going to work myself to the point where I'm absolutely miserable and unhealthy to do it, what's the point? Like, make sure you're happy, make sure that you're actually enjoying it. And if you're pushing yourself to that point, find a way to make it work. Because I guarantee you can. I guarantee you, if you actually sit down and look at what you're doing, look at how much time you're spending on certain things, you can clear up space for that. And that's something I'm perpetually trying to do lately is, like, I use apps on my phone to monitor how much time I'm spending on my phone and what I'm doing. And if I look on there and I see, oh, hey, I downloaded this mobile game, and I'm, casually, every 5 minutes, or not every 5 minutes, spending 5 minutes here or there, and it adds up to like 7 hours a week. Well, that 7 hours a week, I could get something else done or sleep more or whatever. And I'm like, okay, that needs to go. Just being very ruthless with your time and understanding what actually matters. So that way you can be healthy, you can be happy, and you can do what you want to do. It's not easy. Like, because it's so easy to kind of get caught up in your own thing and if you're so busy that you can't take the time to focus on that, then it's hard. But make the time. Find an hour in a week where you can sit down and just go over the week in your head or on paper and figure out what you can optimize and what you can change to make yourself more comfortable, give yourself more time, and be able to do what you want to do.
No, that's a great philosophy. I'm sure I've heard that echoed elsewhere from other people who I respect.
I mean, I kind of steal it from a lot of self-help. I read a lot of self-help books and listen to a lot of those kind of things, like Tim Ferriss, Brendan Burchard, who's sort of he's one of those newer life coach guys. I'm sure you see the ads on YouTube of like, change your life and that. He's one of the few that doesn't creep me out when I, listen to his stuff or see him. Like, a lot of those life coaches I look at them and I'm kind of like, is this person really as happy, or do they secretly kill people in their basement?
This sounds like a cult.
Yeah. This is one of the few guys where I've listened to, because he doesn't seem like that.
We've been going for a pretty good while, so let's take it to our last couple topics here. So, a thing that I saw you were doing kind of as let's call it a soft New Year's resolution was listening to a new album a day. A real dedicated listen. So what inspired this?
What inspired it was a rut. I kind of caught myself where I would just, be listening to the same Spotify playlists and skipping through half of it if it wasn't something, I wanted. I was kind of just stuck in this rut of like, oh, I just want to hear what I already know. And for someone who wants to be creative, like that's not a good thing. If you stay insular, then you don't get anything new to develop. It's kind of like, I'm going to use a bit of a gross analogy. I'm going to try and make it as, not as gross, but you kind of need to constantly eat new food in order to get nutrients and stay healthy. Like if you eat the same thing, your body processes it and then you just eat it again, there's no nutrients left and you're kind of just shoveling garbage back in through you.
Yeah.
And so what it was is I kind of said, well, let's focus on listening to some new music. And I'd originally set it as one album per day. I'm now shifting it around to where I just want to meet, I want to hit around 365 albums by the end of the year.
Yeah.
Just to give myself some leeway because there are, days in a week where it's hard to find some time to sit down.
Some of those like wake up to sleep, just always on sorts of things. They happen.
Exactly. Like you got deadlines, I've got classes, and I just got to hone in on that. I have been, again, trying to find more effective time. It has become easier. Like I moved recently and I now have a 50-minute commute to work, which is about the perfect length to listen to an album.
Yeah, it is.
So what I've been doing for that is I just take my headphones with me. I use a decent pair. I have these Bear Dynamic DT990s.
Nice.
Started bringing those with me. Throw an album on when I leave the door. Turn it off when I get to the college. And just while I'm on the bus, I bring a notebook with me. And I just jot down my thoughts on it to make sure I'm still paying attention, make sure I'm listening.
Yeah, because that was the thing that you mentioned is that you wanted to do a very critical and detailed listen. Not just passively taking it in, but actually absorbing the music.
Exactly, like just focusing on it. Because if you're just kind of putting it on in the background, you're not really going to take in as much as if you were to actually, focus on it. And it's been good. And the biggest thing for me as well is I'm trying to make sure I'm listening to different genres. Like I think I've maybe listened to 2 or 3 metal albums so far throughout the entire month that I've been doing this. And I've probably listened to about, at this point, I think I've listened to like 35, 40 albums or something. I have to go in inventory.
Oh man, so you're actually ahead of schedule.
Oh yeah. I kind of,
because it's only the 23rd.
Yeah. I've been kind of realizing, well, I got, 2 albums I can listen to during the day, and then I can probably listen to one, on a break at work or something. So I'm trying to, at least give myself a buffer because I know there's going to be a period showing up at some point where I'm not going to have the focus to really put in for that.
I was going to say, at this point, you're going to hit that 365 mark by August.
Yeah. I'm going to go for as high as I can, and try and make this more of a habit of just like picking up new music and listening to it. And again, focusing on a variety. Like the first album I listened to was an Earth, Wind & Fire album from the 70s.
Yeah.
Just to give myself some other perspective on that. And that, that 70s funk stuff, if you're into prog rock or prog metal, go back and listen to that stuff because you're going to hear the ancestral roots of everything you love. That sort of really grandiose sound, these complicated guitar parts, sort of interesting rhythms in there. That's all comes from there.
Yeah, some of those funk guys are next level. Actually, fun note is I was talking with let's call him an acquaintance recently about gear stuff, and he was looking for a noise gate so he could make his funk rock chicka chickas even tighter. And I was like, man, that's the same thing that a lot of those gent guys would do to make their chugs like just chop right off.
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, a lot of, if you listen to like 2013, 2014 gent, it has that chicka chicka stuff in there.
Exactly.
Like a lot of early Tesseract stuff, they did a lot of that. I can guarantee you there's, Ackland and those guys were probably listening to a lot of those 70s funk records in there as an influence. But trying to listen to, pop, trying to listen to older stuff, accepting that I'm not going to like everything I listen to. That was sort of the hardest thing was, I would always listen to stuff that I kind of knew I would like and kind of going through and accepting, hey, I'm going to listen to this and it might not be my thing.
Yeah. But you're going to be exposed to it.
Exactly. Like, I might get roasted for this when this comes out, but I put on a Miles Davis record and it's cool, it's smooth, it's relaxing. It's just not my thing.
That's actually funny because the previous guest on this podcast, Alex Purcell, the album that I asked for his recommendation, he gave us Miles Davis Kind of Blue.
That's the exact album I listened to. I'm just like,
hey.
I listen to it, I'm like, okay, this would be cool to have on, like if I'm doing housework or something, just in the background, just to create an atmosphere. But, intently listening, not quite my thing.
It wasn't your thing. It wasn't your thing. So how are you sourcing all of these albums? I saw you had a call to action on your Instagram where you're asking for suggestions. I think I gave a couple for that. I forget what they were.
Yeah, I got them in there. So what I've done is I have a Google spreadsheet that I throw stuff in, and I took a bunch of recommendations from people. I had stuff that I already kind of had on my list to listen to, and I've kind of just made a habit of, if I think of an artist or something, or I should listen to them, I'm just going to jot it down. Like, I got a bunch of it when I was, covering a music history class at the college, where I was just going through and refreshing myself on a lot of the material. And I'm like, oh, I haven't listened to this album by this artist. I haven't listened to this album, and just jot it down and just make an active habit of, whenever you hear about something, don't just kind of absentmindedly say, oh yeah, I'll probably check it out later. Like, write it down and make some intent to listen to it. And then, worst case scenario, what I would do is just flip through playlists on Spotify. And just not listen to the playlist, but be like, oh, hey, there's this artist. I've heard about this person. I heard this person's up and coming. Let's give it a listen and see what's going on.
Interesting.
And you'd be surprised at what you like. Like, honestly, probably the best album, if not, or one of the best albums I've heard so far this year was Pedals for Armor by Hayley Williams. That came out last year.
Okay.
Like, just a phenomenally catchy, enjoyable, sort of not quite lo-fi but laid back kind of pop album.
Interesting.
And just everything in there just sits nicely. I'm in love with like the percussion production on that album, from the composition to the choice of samples or the choice of instrumentation to the mixing on it is just immaculate. It just creates this nice beat to everything where it's there and it's always a little bit interesting, but not so much to where it's distracting. And like, if you told me at the beginning of it, like, I'd listen to a bunch of new albums in a month and I'd like a Hayley Williams album, the most out of all of them, I'd probably not expect that. But
yeah,
that's the point of this whole exercise like this, is to find that kind of stuff, find what you don't, what you're missing.
So, and I guess this will pivot off to a thing that I mentioned is I asked you to think of an album that you would recommend to the audience to help broaden their musical horizons, either as music listeners or music creators themselves. And what is your idea? So
my suggestion here, because as soon as you said that and you wanted a broad scope, this is the first album that comes to mind. It's called The Color Spectrum by The Deer Hunter.
Okay.
So if anyone's ever heard The Deer Hunter, they're sort of a prog rock, sort of this grandiose storytelling kind of indie prog rock kind of band. But they released an album back in, I don't remember what year it was, called The Color Spectrum, which is actually, it's 9 EPs together into like this 3-hour-long album. And it goes through like a bunch of the primary colors, and the EP is sort of a concept on that color itself.
Okay.
So it starts with black, and the black is this really dark, gritty rock, but with a lot of electronic elements in it. And then you go to this red, which is sort of this like stompy kind of aggressive, like distorted folk rock kind of stuff. Orange is more straightforward hard rock. Green is all acoustic stuff. Like indigo is a bunch of like really, abstract electronic stuff. Violet has like this whole show tunes kind of vibe. Like, it feels like, a soundtrack to the Roaring Twenties. But there's all this variety in there, but the way this album is placed and the way the EPs are placed together, it flows so consistently that you go through all these different styles, all these different concepts from start to finish without feeling like, I never really feel sort of a huge shift in tone. Like, because it's so nicely placed and consistently organized. And so if you got the time, like, I heard that album back in the day, do make sure you're getting the full one, because there is a smaller version that just has like, one track from each, which is great if you want to test it out, but I really would push for the full version. I remember when I first heard the album, I was, I think I was helping with accounting work at the grocery store, and I think I listened to that album once a day for like a month straight. Just on repeat, because there's so much in there.
That's a marathon. I respect that.
Well, when you're sitting there going through, cash deposits and updating spreadsheets, like, you need something.
All right. Well, I think that's a great idea, and I think that is a good point to end this episode.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you very much for coming on. Any last words you'd like to share?
Yep, stay safe out there. It's an interesting time in our lives that we're going through, and stay safe, stay physically and mentally healthy, and do what you can to just get through it all.